Hi friends, welcome to our series on histology made easy with drawing on diagrams. The subject today is on epithelial tissues, epithelium in general, which is a relatively simple topic. You would wonder whether or not you need to do a video about it. If you could just go by the classifications about simple or stratified, flattened, cuboidal, columnar, it doesn't seem to be really any complicated at all. It's not really complicated. What I'm going to try to do for you is to give you some examples in such a way that you don't have to memorize anything regarding epithelium. We will come just out of just common sense, because most of these structures are just the result of just common sense. To begin with, we'll ask ourselves, what are we going to line? What are you going to cover with these epithelial structures or epithelia? Well, we know our outer surface, of course, but we have a whole host of other surfaces inside, like our mouths, intestine, lungs, vessels, heart, pleural cavities, etc. Those are surfaces that need to be taken care of. What if you had an area of those surfaces that is not really protected or totally covered? For example, if you have an ulcer in the stomach, in the skin, and you have, for example, some cells here, maybe another one over here, and then you have the possibility of having of bleeding in the area. For example, let's make it something very kind of dramatic here. If you have an ulcer of the skin, it's going to be infected, it's going to hurt, etc., etc. So you start wondering, yeah, we need something to protect it, just like an orange needs a covering to be maintained. So you need coverings, which are essentially the epithelia. Now, if you have the classification of the epithelia as simple if it's a single layer, stratified if you have several layers, and then as far as the shape of the epithelia, you're going to call it a flattened, cuboidal, or columnar. So it couldn't be that easy. The question is now applying those ideas, those concepts into specific situations, which is what I'm trying to do, so that you don't have to memorize anything essentially. If you ask yourself, for example, what kind of epithelium we have in our skin, I don't think any of you is going to say, oh, this is a simple cuboidal or a simple epithelium. That doesn't make any sense, right? You need something that's going to be stratified. Okay, if we're talking about the skin, it is going to be stratified, and we all agree on that. What about if we make it stratified cuboidal or stratified columnar? That wouldn't make that much sense, because the cells would probably break with the forces that are applied to the skin. Whatever we do, it would just break. So we know that. We know the answer. Let's just go directly about it. We have a stratified squamous. Without going into the detail, because that's a subject of skin later, we'll just say that, to make it a long story short, we have layers of cells that are essentially, not all the time, flat. These cells are flat, and they are tightly attached to each other and to the basement membrane. Not only that, they are filled with a intermediate filament, keratin, which is the only purpose of that filament is to fill the cytoplasm of the cells to give them strength. This is an epithelium that is going to give you strength as far also, besides also protection from infection, from dehydration, etc. In the skin, there is also one step beyond. It's a keratinized squamous epithelium in the sense that the upper layer, I'm going to draw a different color, the cells lose their nuclei and are converted by just pretty much like ghosts of cells full of keratin. We won't say much. Maybe one thing I could add is sometimes when you look at the skin, you're going to see that the skin in certain sections the cells are going to look like this, almost like spines, having like spiny projections. And that's what we used to be called before the stratum spinosum in the skin. The only thing we have here is desmosomes. The cells are very rich in desmosomes, which allow them to attach to each other very strongly. So this is a very resistant epithelium, stratified, squamous, keratinized. Now, there are areas in the body that also require resistance to mechanical forces. You tell me about it. You can think about it. The mouth. Yes, the mouth. Yes, the throat. And the continuation, which is the esophagus. That's as far as the GI system is. So we have, in those places, a stratified squamous epithelium as well. That is not keratinized. The upper layer is not composed of dead cells only. There's another area in the body that requires, that's also a delicate mucosal surface, which is the vagina. Also in the penis it happens because the sex requires friction, requires movement, and that requires protection. Otherwise, people would bleed in in intercourse. So, though, mouth, throat, esophagus, and female genitalia, mostly going into the vagina. That's easy to remember, right? That actually is common sense. Now, let's go to another type of epithelium, the so-called urothelium. Let me write down here. Well, the urothelium is the type of epithelium that lines the urinary tract, starting from the area of the pelvis and calyces all the way down to ureter and bladder, and sometimes some areas below. You would say, well, could I put it just a simple epithelium, cuboidal? Well, because there's nothing mechanical going on there, just the urine. Well, really not just the urine, because the urine is sometimes becomes concentrated, and it's kind of toxic to the cells. It can damage the cells. So the cells we need to have a stratified epithelium. The question is it going to be a stratified cuboidal or stratified squamous? Well, it's kind of in between. It's kind of in between. When you look at this kind of epithelium, the lower layers seem to have more a cuboidal or cylindrical appearance, whereas the upper portion has a cell called the umbrella cell that is quite resistant to the urine. Besides that, this is epithelium which is called transitional epithelium because it was so transitional between the squamous and cuboidal or columnar stratified. This epithelium is also has the possibility of being stretched. If you happen not to have time to go into the bathroom, the bladder fills, and it can pull to this epithelium, and this epithelium is able to become, I would say, less stratified, like this, diminish the number of layers. Normally it has about between 4 and 5 cells, but it can have less when it is stretched. Now, let's go to another kind of epithelium, in this case, the one that lines the vessels. If you have a vessel of any type in your body, and it has blood flowing in all the time, you want to have what kind of epithelium? Stratified squamous? Cuboidal? No. You want to have a very, very simple kind of epithelium, flattened, and let's make it like this. It's going to be, the endothelium is going to be like this. You want to have an epithelium that is as flat as possible, so that allows the flow of blood in the heart, in the arteries, in the veins, in the capillaries. In addition to that, in the capillaries, you're going to have the possibility of an exchange of gases, because of the epithelium is very thin. So this is what happens with the endothelium of the vessels. Now, since we have the same kind of epithelium, or no, let's say something. These cells are not very simple as they saw. They have a very myriad of functions, most of them related also to the coagulation system. But we are not going to go into that. Let's go to another area. You know that the heart moves all your life, while you're alive. I hope you remember that. And the heart is surrounded by a membrane called the pericardium that surrounds tightly and then goes like this. In other words, it's a sac that allows the heart to move freely without any adhesions around the blood, around the heart. What about the lungs? But the same thing. You need to have a visceral pleura, and that reflects itself into the parietal pleura, and small amounts of fluids are among them. And the lungs can, as you inspire or expire, they move freely without any interference from adjacent structures. Finally, let's say something about something similar. The small bowel, for example, which also refers to the colon. The small bowel moves, and that definitely moves, and it moves the entire wall of the small bowel, and also the colon or stomach, and also the duodenum, but some areas are covered or not by peritoneum. I'm not going to go into detail for that. But the bowel, especially the small bowel, is covered by peritoneum, the visceral peritoneum, and there is also the parietal peritoneum. Well, it's too much to tell you something. What is happening here? You need a couple of layers that will slide very easily and without any interference. And the cells here, here, and here are called mesothelial cells. Mesothelium cells. The name comes because they are from mesodermal origin. Now the cells, how are they? Are they just as simple as before? They are very flat. They are very flat, allowing that movement of these structures. If you look them from above, they will look like something like this, like a mosaic of cells that are very very, very flat. So you know now what the mesothelium looks like, and there has a lot in common with the peritoneum, the pleura, and the pericardium, essentially the same type of cell. I won't go into much detail into that, but let's keep moving because I know you don't have much time. We have also some epitheliums, some epithelia, like the kidney, for example. Like the tubules of the kidney have cuboidal epithelium. And like this. And obviously, what happens through in those tubules of the kidney? You have what is going to be the urine, but the glomerular filtrate is going to be going in this direction. And these cells are going to absorb or secrete depending on the needs of the body. So they need to be a little bit chunkier, cuboidal, and that's why they are like that. What about another type that doesn't seem to be, but it's really important, is the one that has, I'm going to just make it very simple, composed of a single layer of columnar cells. Is there any place in the body that we have the lumen covered by a simple columnar cells? Yes. And what is? The GI tract. The GI tract, excluding the esophagus, from the stomach all the way down to the anus, it is covered by a single cell layer of columnar cells. These cells are going to vary according to different locations, and some of them are going to have microvilli, which are tubular projections of the membrane that allow the cell to have a much increased cell surface, okay? I won't say much about it, but it is incredible that is what happens all the way up to the rectum from the esophagus. What about the next one that we have is the respiratory epithelium. It's kind of difficult to kind of figure out what kind of epithelium you would need. If it's simple, it wouldn't do any good to us because we need the functions of mucin production, we need cilia, and so we need a different kind of epithelium. And if you look at the respiratory epithelium, the cells are going to look kind of columnar looking, but the nuclei are going to be at different locations. So we are going to think, wow, this is going to be a stratified columnar. For sure, because it looks like that. No, since many decades ago, we understood that this is a pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium that also has cilia, not microvilli, but cilia. And cilia are essentially long projections of the membrane that had an axoneme in the center, and these structures are able to move. They are covered by mucus, but they are able to move all the way to projecting all the little substances that get into the trachea, for example, all the way to the throat. And it's also very important, sometimes medical students forget that above the mouth, we have respiratory epithelium. I don't want to, offend you guys, but that's the reality. The nose, the paranasal sinuses, the nasopharynx, it's all respiratory epithelium. And all the cilia in that location move backwards towards the throat. In other words, this is the respiratory epithelium. Perhaps we could add one cell that is somewhat typical. That's called the goblet cell. The goblet cell, like this, is a cell that produces mucus, mostly acidic mucin, and that has been compared to the goblet. That's why they call it the goblet cell. And obviously it produces mucus. The mucus is going to protect the surfaces of the respiratory epithelium. Now, watch out. The goblet cells are not only present in the respiratory epithelium. They are present in the small bowel and the large bowel, and even in odd places such as the conjunctiva. So the goblet cells are not, trademark of the respiratory epithelium. Okay. Now, just trying to go a little bit, move ahead. And we're going to talk about the subject of glands. Let's be very simple. If you have a layer of cells here that needs to secrete something, I'm going to add something here like this group of cells needs to secrete something. I'm going to. It could be a better job if it did the following trick. It would, if these cells decided to penetrate into the underlying lamina propria and form a gland. In other words, a gland is nothing more than the projection towards the connective tissues of the same. Now imagine how much, how much more able of production of secretion we have. This kind of situation happens in the stomach, but it's very dense and specialized according to the region of the stomach. Now these glands can do different things. They can branch, right? They can actually branch, and they can have the distal portions become, in other words, so they can be tubular or acinar or simple or compound. In other words, the glands may be simple or may be compound or branched. You have all the combinations in different glands, and it's better not to go into the detail. Whenever you see a specific organ, you can mention if the cell is tubulo-acinar or simple or complex, depending on the organ. I'd rather not give you examples, but just give you the example of what a gland is. Now, all these glands, essentially, including the sweat glands, secrete to a surface, to an outer surface, like the sweat, or to our inner surface. Could it be the GI tract, the respiratory tract? And all these glands are going to be called exocrine. Well, exocrine glands doesn't mean that all the glands are going to be secreted outside the body, which the name would imply if you take it as meaning outside. It just it secretes to a duct, from a duct to a different cavity. That's exocrine. And we have a different kind of glands in which the cells are different types of glands, of course, produce the hormones into the vessels that surround them. And these are the hormones, right? The thyroid, the adrenal, the pituitary gland, all of them are endocrine glands, and I would write it here, the name here, endocrine, because they're going to secrete to the blood, and they're going to be transported via the blood all over the body. So this is the difference between exocrine and endocrine glands. There's another difference between the type of secretion that we can have. Let's make it like that. Some glands just produce the secretion from the Golgi apparatus, and these vacuoles just liberates its contents outside. And this are the merocrine glands, also merocrine glands, which are most of the glands are like that, including the pancreas, including the sweat glands, but some of them have a different kind of secretion in which the cell, let me put it over here, is so generous that it gives away part of its own substance. In other words, the cell lets go the upper portion of the cell, and that's called the cells the apocrine cells. This is the nucleus, and what goes out is part of the cells, the apocrine cells. Of course, one of the typical examples of apocrine secretion is the breast milk, which is not clear, as you know, and I don't want to offend you guys, but the milk is milky. It's more thick because of the fact that it is composed of pieces of multiple numerous cells. And the last one, which we do have another one that goes even beyond that, in which we have the cells that are mostly full of lipids, but the entire cell breaks down and goes out. So it gives itself for the benefit of the body and sacrifices in a kamikaze fashion the entire cell. These are the holocrine cells, the holocrine. Now, these cells are not very, this kind of secretion is not common. The only one that I know is the sebaceous glands on the skin that are quite attached to the neck of the hairs, and they secrete what the secretion itself is almost like a little bit of a cream that protects the skin. Well, the final thing that we're going to mention is the means of adhesion of the different cells in the different epithelia. This has a little bit of a few names that come from Latin and are a little bit confusing. But we have to just imagine that if you're going to build a little wall, you need cement, otherwise the bricks would fall apart. And not only you need cement between the bricks, but also between the last layer and the ground. Now, what is the cement? The cells don't use cement. I'm sorry about that, but they use proteins. When we talked about the cell membrane, we talked about the membranes that are in different levels of the cell membrane. And we are going to mention the different means of junction. These are proteins joining together cells so that they cannot separate each other, but also they can also communicate between each other. Let's try to make it simple as much as I can. This is a membrane. This goes this way. And then we go this way. This is, for example, one cell, and this is another cell. And this will be one nucleus of the cell, and this will be another nucleus of the cells. And the cells, it's not enough, like I say, that the cells are just looking at each other. They need to be really tightly attached. And when it comes to the tight junctions, we got two proteins from each side of the membrane called claudins that attach to the other one like that. These are the claudins. Now, the way they do it is similar to what a sewing machine would go to a fabric. In other words, you would have this one being attached in this direction, and the other one going attached in this direction, and the other one in this direction, so that the cells are really tightly attached. Another type of adhesion, the cells are a little bit more separated, and we have for a longer time, we have the zonula adherence. Sorry for these names, I didn't make them up. I probably would have made them much simpler, but that's the way it is. Tight junction, zonal adherence. And then you have proteins that come from one side and the other that are the cadherins. Cadherins that attach to each other, the cadherins. Well, and also we have obviously some anchoring proteins on the other side. And the filaments of actin that going to do, let's make it like this, that are going to be attached to these structures. Now, finally, we're going to go a little bit to two structures which are more simple in a way, and what are called the desmosomes and the hemidesmosomes. The desmosomes also use cadherins in the center, and they pretty much the anchoring proteins are pretty dense, like this. We have the cadherins in the center, and we have the filaments of actin here. Now, what about the hemidesmosomes? These are the desmosomes. Desmosomes. And these are the hemidesmosomes that are half of a desmosome that attaches to the basement membrane that underlines most of the cells of the body. Here we have essentially the same, instead of having cadherins, we have integrins, but it's probably a detail of minor importance. And we have also the same filaments of actin that are going to grip, enhance the strength of these structures. We mentioned also we need one structure that communicates the cells, that forms a hole between both membranes, and these are the gap junctions. We'll put the gap junctions over here. The gap junctions are long proteins like this that form a hole through the membrane. We have these proteins are called connexins, and the hole in the center is called connexon, and the cells can communicate with each other, which in many instances seems to be very important. Well, okay. I know that this area, talking about the tight junctions, zonal adherence, and also the gap junctions, I'll write it down. The gap junctions. You may kind of forget about them. As the desmosomes is easy to remember. The zonula, there's more space. The tight junctions, we have only one protein in the center. That essentially that's the glue between the cells and the channels between the cells. Now, let's say something. regarding the endocrine glands, I'm going to erase this here. We have an issue with the, remember I was talking about the endocrine glands like the thyroid, and the thyroid is in the center of the neck, and somebody will say, well, how is it possible something in the center of the neck is going to be an epithelial structure? But you have to remember that in embryonal life, the tongue has a little hole and it communicates to a projection that later gives rise to the thyroid gland and finally disappears. In other words, the thyroid gland has an epithelial origin, but later becomes isolated from the rest of the epithelium. But it is epithelium. Now, when it comes to the roof of the nose, for example, if you come to go to, this is the nose, this is the sphenoid bone. From here, in the embryonic life, we have cells that will migrate upwards and then become totally isolated and form the hypophysis, the adenohypophysis or the anterior hypophysis. Well, why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you this because there is one situation. When it comes to talking about cancer, all these structures are going to have one thing in common, or most of them. They're going to be carcinomas. Yes, so what kind of carcinoma? Well, it's a squamous cell carcinoma of the skin, squamous cell carcinoma of the mouth, squamous cell carcinoma of the cervix, or, for example, squamous carcinoma of the lung, or carcinoma of the colon or the stomach, or carcinoma of the thyroid, for example. So now, what is the difference between the other components? They are not called carcinomas, but are called sarcomas. Well, these sarcomas are not originated from an epithelial structure. They are coming from muscle, adipose tissue, skeletal muscle, fibrous tissue, etc., etc. And those are sarcomas for it. I don't want to go into details with them, but in the case, for example, of the tumor arising from the fat, it would be liposarcoma. Of course, we have other types of tumors, such as, for example, the lymphomas. Lymphomas arise from all the lymphoid organs in the body, such as the spleen, the lymph nodes, etc., the tonsil, etc., etc. We also have melanomas. I'd like to say, finally, one little tiny thing regarding the mesothelium, a tumor arising from the mesothelium. And that's usually from the pleura, but it could arise from the pericardium or the pleura, more very rarely, and that has to do with asbestos. What are the name of these tumors? Mesotheliomas. Mesotheliomas are not good tumors, not only because they're aggressive, but because they usually have the whole pleural cavity to grow, and it's very difficult to remove them. I hope you kind of gain something from this reflections and from these ideas, and we'll see you next time. Take care.